Hello there, once again welcome to our science lesson, and we just want to remind ourselves previously we looked at microorganisms and we said microorganisms are those organisms that are very tiny because they are microscopic, and for that purpose to study them you need other apparatus so that you can be able to look at them. We say that there are two ways of looking at them, using a light microscope or using an electron microscope. And we are able to find out that these microorganisms can be grouped into at least four categories or groups. We have bacteria, fungi, viruses, and microscopic algae. But we noted one thing about microorganisms. We said most of these microorganisms cause changes in our bodies. Those changes in the bodies are not most of the time positive, but they're negative. In other words, they cause dysfunctioning of the body. For that purpose, we were able to emphasize that those dysfunctional impairments are what we call disease or malfunctioning. And those microorganisms that cause diseases, we gave them a name as pathogens. So those microorganisms that cause diseases are called pathogens. But we noted that they can only cause disease if they are transmitted from a medium where they are into the body of a healthy individual. So they could be transmitted from an infected person to a healthy person, or from a medium like air, water, soil, or another organism, for instance a pet, into a healthy individual, and in the process they cause a disease. So we want to catch up from there, that the study of pathogens, we are also able to find out that is called pathology, the study of diseases. But now again, we are able to find out that there are two main methods of transmission. We have direct transmission, whereby if an individual comes into contact, direct contact, with an infected person, it will allow transmission or transfer of the pathogen from the infected person to a healthy person. We were calling that transmission as direct transmission. And then we said that those diseases that are transmitted directly or through direct contact, we gave them a name as contagious diseases. But you also say that we have indirect ways of transmission, indirect transmission. For instance, if we are going to have somebody sneezing and that person is suffering from, for instance, tuberculosis, is going to release droplets into the air that have the bacteria, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which when inhaled by a healthy person, that person is going to be infected. Now I want to pick from infection, where a person has now acquired or the body has come into contact with the pathogen. What happens? So in our today's lesson, we want to find out what will happen when the body comes into direct contact with a pathogen, or sometimes if there is an injury to the body. So that biological response, natural biological response of body tissues, when it comes into direct contact with a harmful stimuli. In this case, the pathogen is a harmful stimuli. Is called inflammatory response. So today, our topic is inflammatory response. So I've said the body has come into contact with a pathogen, or maybe it has come into contact with a harmful stimuli like a hot object. There will be an inflammatory response. Inflammatory response simply means a biological response of the body tissues towards a harmful stimuli. Stimuli could be in form of a pathogen. Because it's harmful to the body, it causes impairment. It could be in form of damage to the cells. For instance, if you hit yourself, maybe you are trying to drive a nail into a wood, and then by bad luck you hit your finger. There'll be some inflammatory response. So we shall find out what will cause inflammatory response, the initial stages, the final stages, and the outcomes of inflammatory response. So the word inflammation is derived from Latin. It's derived from Latin word inflammatio. But what's the definition of inflammation? Definition. Inflammation is a complex biological reaction response. You can say reaction or response of body tissues or cells to a harmful stimuli. To harmful stimuli. Because there are many, you do not need to put there the letter A. Harmful stimuli, e.g. Before we look at examples, we have already come across the word stimuli. We said a stimuli is a change in the environment. But that change, if it is harmful, then the body will produce inflammatory response. So examples of harmful stimuli include pathogen. Just like we have said, we have those microorganisms that cause diseases are called pathogens. So if a pathogen has been transferred from either a medium or from an infected person to a healthy person, and then that healthy person acquires the pathogen, that is a harmful stimuli, it's going to produce inflammatory response. So we have pathogen, damaged cells or tissues. For example, if you burn, if you have a burn, you have touched a hot object, or by bad luck, you are carrying hot water and then it spills on your skin. Or sometimes even some allergens or irritants, like maybe a spray, a substance that can, when you inhale, and then it causes irritation, maybe in form of liquid, gas, or even solid. So those are examples of harmful stimuli. But why is it important? Why is it that this inflammatory response is important? Remember, this is a harmful stimuli. Suppose it is maintained in the body. What will happen? Pathogen, damaged tissue or cells, or irritant. There will be more problems being caused to the body. So inflammatory response simply is a protective mechanism of the body against these harmful stimuli. So inflammation is a protective mechanism of the body against harmful stimuli. They're supposed to either you restore the body tissues back to normal, eliminate the source of danger to the body, or even form dead cells and tissues, and together with it pathogens that are actually maybe could be in form of pus or anything else. So it is a protective mechanism. So this protective mechanism will include some components of the inflammatory response. Components of inflammatory response will include: 1, immune cells. Immune cells. To destroy the pathogen, we require immune cells. These immune cells are mostly in form of white blood cells. But specific white blood cells include phagocytes, and another type of blood cells, white blood cells, called macrophages. So immune cells, these ones are for fighting the pathogen, for killing the bacteria. We have different ways of killing bacteria using the immune cells. The phagocytes, for instance, they'll engulf the pathogen and release lytic enzymes. Those lytic enzymes are going to destroy the pathogen. Also, we have blood vessels. Blood vessels, specifically the arteries and capillaries. Because when a body is exposed to a harmful stimuli, one of the things that happens is that the blood vessels will dilate. In other words, there will be overdilation of blood vessels. We are going to find out why overdilation is important. Other component of inflammatory response, we have mediators, biological mediators. Biological mediators. In this case, we have 3 main mediators that are involved. We have a substance called histamine. We have a substance called bradykinin. And we also have hormone called prostaglandins. Glandin, if it is 1. So I want to find out how histamine, bradykinin, prostaglandin, together with blood vessels and immune cells, will be involved in inflammatory response. So first of all, we must know the components because this one forms the foundation of inflammation. So before we go further, we just have to remind ourselves, inflammation is simply a response of body tissues to a harmful stimuli. Most of the harmful stimuli is in form of pathogens. That's why we need to find out how immune cells will be involved, what will happen to blood vessels, and what will be the role of biological mediators. Process of inflammation. Now we have to understand that most of the biological reactions in our bodies are not spontaneous. There is always one step following another. The steps or the process could be fast, but they are never spontaneous. We shall form, one product will be formed which will lead to another, or one stage leading to another. So we have several stages. We can number them. One of them, it's very important. It will start by, first of all, the presence of a harmful stimuli. For instance, a pathogen, an irritant, or damaged cells. Damaged cells could be in form or due to a burn. You have hit yourself, your nail, you have your toe maybe on a stone while you're trying to play soccer, if you are playful enough. So you must have the presence of harmful stimuli. Harmful stimuli. This could be pathogens. So the body is exposed to harmful stimuli. Body tissues or cells are exposed. Are exposed to stimuli, the harmful stimuli. Pathogen. Let us consider pathogen because those are the most common cause of impairment and malfunctioning in our bodies. So when the cells have been exposed to that, we are going to have receptors in the cells or tissues now recognizing that this is a harmful stimuli. Receptors in cells or tissues will recognize the stimuli as harmful. So upon recognition now, the cells will act accordingly, or there will be a cause. This is a cause effect. The effect on cells. This causes cells or tissues to release mediators. This causes cells or tissues to release mediators. And in this case, we have already mentioned those mediators. We have mentioned mediator histamine. You can also remember, we have mentioned another mediator called bradykinin. We have mentioned also prostaglandin. Prostaglandin, these are hormone. So I want to find out the effect of each of these histamine in our subsequent stage. So the effects of those mediators will include histamine, will cause vasodilation, and increases permeability of blood vessels. And in this case, we have mentioned two arteries, arterioles and the capillaries. Now, we have already come across this term. In our previous lesson, we mentioned vasodilation. We said vasodilation, vaso comes from the word vessel. Dilation is an increase. So when the lumen of blood vessels increases, the lumen of the blood vessels is increasing, or diameter, we call that process as vasodilation. So histamine causes vasodilation and increased permeability of the blood vessels. So what is the effect of these two scenarios, vasodilation and increased permeability? So vasodilation, when a blood vessel increases in diameter, what will happen is that it will allow more blood to flow to the area of injury, of damage, or where the pathogen have invaded. So vasodilation leads to more blood flowing to area of injury, maybe that area that has been burnt, area of invasion by pathogen, or area of irritants, or where irritant has been exposed. An irritant could be, for instance, acid. When you put an acid on your skin, we are going to have inflammatory response. When you inhale in maybe a pungent substance like gas, what will happen? There will be inflammation. So vasodilation, more blood will flow to the area of injury. And because of that, more blood flowing to the area of injury, you realize that the area becomes more red. More red. This term is also called, becomes more rubber. Becomes more red because we know that blood is red. It was red, for example, if you hit your nail with a hammer, you realize that that area becomes more red. The nail becomes more red because it has led to this reaction, histamine, vasodilation, more blood has flown to that area. So the area becomes more red. And then another thing, the area becomes hot. You just feel that the area is more hot or becomes warmer. The area becomes hot. Remember, the role of blood is to distribute heat. So more of it becomes more red. The area becomes more red, and also because blood distributes heat, therefore the area will become more hot. And then we have also talked about permeability. Increased permeability. What will be the effect Increased permeability allows, it will allow leakage of more plasma proteins from outside the blood vessels to the area. So it will allows leakage of two things: plasma proteins or blood proteins, plasma proteins, and we also have fluids. Remember, we talked about lymphatic fluid and the rest, and fluids from outside the blood vessels to area of injury, area of inversion or the area of injury. Now, when we have more fluids getting into maybe a substance, just any other thing, you realize that it's going to lead to increase in volume of that tissue. So the effect of this increased permeability, allowing more proteins and fluids to flow into that area, it will result into swelling of the tissue. So we point out that increased permeability with the resultant flow of proteins and fluids to damaged area leads to swelling of the area or the tissue. This is true. When you burn yourself, first thing, the area becomes red. Another thing, the area becomes more hot. Or if you hit yourself, even if there is an infection, those things will happen. And then again, the area becomes swollen. Why? Because of histamine that has increased permeability of the blood vessels, and in the process allowing more fluids and plasma proteins to flow to the area of injury, so leading to swelling. So that's the term that describes swelling of the tissue is either written as edema or edema. The two describes the same. So that's the effect of histamine. And then what about the rest? We have bradykinins. Bradykinins is also a mediator, a molecular mediator. Bradykinins, now it also enhances increased permeability, vasodilation, but again it increases sensitivity of nerve endings. Now, because of this, of sensitized nerve endings, you realize that the area, when you touch that area, it becomes more painful. Therefore, the area or tissue becomes more painful. Because of this molecular mediator, which has increased sensitivity of nerve endings. Remember, nerve endings are inclusive, so many of them, together with pain receptors, or the nerve endings that end in pain receptors. So bradykinins has three roles. Causes vasodilation or effect vasodilation, causing increased permeability just like histamine, but additionally increases sensitivity of nerve endings. Therefore, the area becomes very painful. You just brush a little bit, even a touch of a cloth or a towel, that place becomes very painful. The other mediator is prostaglandin 7. Prostaglandin. Prostaglandin is a hormone. Prostaglandin will now come in because the blood vessels have increased in diameter, the lumen, allowing more blood to flow in the area. If it was a cut, a lot of blood is flowing out. We call it hemorrhage. So to prevent excessive loss of blood, prostaglandin will now come in so that clots are formed. When clots are formed, it's going to stop the bleeding and also initiate the healing process. So this one leads to clot formation. Clot formation. This clot formation is important because it stops excessive bleeding. If it was a mechanical injury that caused a break or a severe that caused separation of the blood vessel, excessive bleeding. And again, because a clot has been formed, that clot, when it dries, it is going to initiate the healing process. Initiates healing process. Now, we also have other effects of increased permeability and vasodilation. Vasodilation also will allow the flow of immune cells that we have already mentioned previously as the components of inflammatory response. So we are going to have immune cells, the phagocytes and macrophages flowing or migrating to the area of invasion or the area of injury. And it's very important. We are going to find out why. So vasodilation also allows migration of immune cells we have already mentioned those immune cells, two of them, the phagocytes and macrophages. So the effect of these two together, they usually engulf and destroy, if it was a pathogen, through lytic reaction or enzymatic reaction. Phagocytes and macrophages engulf. Engulf means surrounding through amoebic movement. Engulf and destroy. And destroy pathogens through enzymatic reactions. Now, these cells, phagocytes and macrophages, they usually have vesicles. Those vesicles release lytic enzymes. So those are the reactions that we are talking about. Lytic enzymes are destructive enzymes. And another effect of phagocytes is that they release a chemical. When those chemicals are released, they'll flow into blood. Blood will carry it to part of the brain called hypothalamus. You can remember hypothalamus. We talked about parts of the brains, and then we said hypothalamus majorly is the center for controlling temperature in our bodies because it has the thermoreceptors. So phagocytes will release a chemical substance that will be detected by hypothalamus. And since the hypothalamus is meant for temperature regulation, one of the things, the effect is that temperature of the tissue or of the body is going to increase. That is why when you are infected with a pathogen or you are suffering from a disease, one of the most common symptoms is increase in temperature. Sometimes it's referred to as fever. Phagocytes releases a chemical, and that chemical is detected, which is detected by hypothalamus. So upon detection, hypothalamus, there will be thus increased body temperature, and resultant fever. So there will be increased body temperature and resultant fever due to phagocytes releasing that chemical in blood, which will be detected by hypothalamus, part of the brain, now causing increase in temperature. So I've said most of the time when somebody is infected by a disease, one of the most common symptoms of most of the diseases is increase in temperature due to that effect. Now, sometimes, because of all those activities that we have mentioned, vasoconstriction, increased permeability, and then increased sensitivity to pain. In fact, pain, increased to sensitivity to pain, increased temperature and fever from the effect of phagocytic chemicals. Sometimes the person may fail in functioning, maybe, for instance, movement. It can lead to immobility. This may result to functional impairments. Impairments, for instance, being unable to move, immobility. Now, this is how sometimes the beasting causes that reaction. When you are stung by a bee or a wasp, those are some of the reaction, the flow of reactions until that place becomes red, becomes more swollen, becomes more hot. You realize that. And then if, for instance, the beast, if there were many of them, you receive many of the stings. And in the process, you become immobile. And then the other effect, apart from immobility, we also have other effects due to vasodilation. Due to vasodilation, sometimes there'll be a drop in the blood pressure. A drop in blood pressure usually interferes with the normal circulation of blood, and in the process, it is going to impair transportation of oxygen to the tissues that require or that demand oxygen. Oxygen being important, if the brains are going to lack oxygen, one of the features of that or characteristic of that will be immobility. So we can also say it may also cause a drop in blood pressure. So this blood pressure, if it's going to go down, transportation of oxygen to organs and tissues that demand it is going to be impaired. One major important organ in our body being the brain. If the brain is not receiving enough nutrients and oxygen, therefore it's not going to function well, and the effect will be immobility. So when there is a drop in blood pressure, it may cause or causing impairment in transportation of oxygen to tissues that require it. We know that all tissues require oxygen, but we have some tissues, if they lack oxygen completely, then the next thing is death. So that is the process of inflammation. First of all, we must have the harmful stimuli being exposed to body tissues and cells. The cells are going to release the mediators. We have mentioned them: histamine, bradykinins, prostaglandin. But the largest of the effect that is caused is due to histamine. Histamine will be released, which causes vasodilation, increasing permeability. And we have known the effect of vasodilation, permeability. Bradykinins, increasing sensitivity of nerve endings. And then prostaglandin, which is a very good factor here to bring or to restore the normal condition of the tissues, brings about clotting. Clotting prevents excessive bleeding and also initiates repair and healing of the tissues. So as we continue looking at it, then we can easily come up with the symptoms of inflammation. Symptoms of inflammation. So from that procedure or the step or the process that we have gone through together, then it's very easy to outline symptoms of inflammation. We have said vasodilation leads to excess or more blood flowing to the tissue or cells, and in the process the area becomes red. So redness of the tissue. Redness of the tissues affected. So the tissues becomes red. We have seen why it becomes red. Redness of the tissues affected. And then the tissues, if you are doing localized temperature detection or measurement, the temperature or becomes more hot. The tissues becomes hot. The tissues becomes hot. The temperature is going to increase. We have looked at two factors that causes increase in temperature. We have found out that more blood flowing brings more heat, because blood is the one that distributes heat. And then also phagocytes releasing chemicals that will now stimulate hypothalamus to raise body temperature. We have also realized that permeability allows blood proteins and also tissue fluid to flow into the tissue or the site of infection. So because of that, there is swelling of the tissue. Swelling of the tissue. So the tissue becomes swollen. And then we have also said that because of the bradykinase increasing sensitivity of the tissues affected, then becomes pain. There will be pain. So the area becomes more painful by just touching, brushing a towel, even a cotton wool, just going over that wounded place. It becomes more painful because bradykinins have increased sensitivity of the nerve endings. So these symptoms are very easy to outline. And then now, what are now the outcomes of inflammation? Outcomes, or what will be the effect after the inflammation process. So one of the things that can happen is this: complete restoration of the affected tissue back to normal. Restoration. To normal. Restoration of the tissue to normal. We have seen that even if it was some damaged cells, they are going to be destroyed by the phagocytes and the macrophages. And then another outcome, there will be formation of pus. Formation of pus. Pus is a creamish, depending on the intensity of inflammation. This is just a liquid that is formed, but it is composed of dead pathogens. It has dead pathogens. If it was bacteria, we shall have dead pathogens. But again, you also have dead or destroyed dead cells. Maybe there was damage. For instance, you have hit your finger. We are going to have dead cells, like dead cells from the damage. And also, we also have dead cells from the inflammatory response. That inflammatory response usually also leads to destruction of otherwise the cells that were may be infected by the pathogens, cells from damage or from inflammatory response. Inflammatory response. And then now, at the end of it, why is it important? Roles of inflammation or inflammatory response. Why is it important? Role of inflammatory response. We have seen that it has several roles. If there was a pathogen that has invaded the body, you realize that it's going to eliminate the source of injury, which could be the damaged cells or the pathogen. So eliminates harmful stimuli. So in this case, e.g., pathogens that had gotten their way into the body system are going to be eliminated. We also have damaged cells that are going to be eliminated. If there are irritants, again, irritants are going to be eliminated. And then after that, how does it eliminate these pathogens, damaged cells, and irritants. We have said outcome, it forms pus. So in the process, when that pus gets out of the body, it is clearing the body of pathogens, damaged cells, and so many other things. So clears the body of necrotic cells. Necrotic means damaged, necrotic cells, together with pathogens through formation of pus. And then the last, remember, we talked about clotting being initiated. And that clotting is important because it is going to bring about healing and repair of tissues. So it initiates healing process. Initiates healing process through formation of clots. So I think we have understood very well how inflammatory response takes place. What leads to inflammatory response? So inflammation to occur, we must have a harmful stimuli. That harmful stimuli is exposed to the body, it gets into the blood system, and in the process, molecular mediators are released, inclusive histamine, prostaglandins, and bradykinins. We have seen how they are going to be very important together with stimulation of immune cells. Immune cells will now migrate to the area of invasion. So realize that when you cut yourself, at that point we have more of the phagocytes and macrophages, so that they can now engulf and destroy the pathogen that could take that advantage of getting into the blood stream. And we have said it's a very important process because one is going to eliminate that harmful stimuli that had gotten into our bodies, and then is going to clear the body of the destroyed cells and initiate a healing process. So I think you have enjoyed this lesson. If you have a question, any reaction, you always have our contact. You can call us, you can always email us. Thank you. Welcome to our other lesson where we shall discuss some few questions on the same.